Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Hetek World, our brand new English language podcast channel. Thank you for subscribing to our channel and thank you for watching us. And via Zoom, our guest for today, Mr. Gladden Pappin, the president of the Hungarian Institute of Foreign Affairs. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
This is a very important day in terms of foreign policy and foreign issues for Hungary. This is the European Union two-day summit that has just started a couple of hours ago. And for us, the main issue is Ukraine. The European Union wants to start the negotiating process for inclusion of Ukraine into the Union. And there are a number of questions about it. How do you see, what are the conditions Ukraine has already fulfilled in order to start these negotiations, and what are those conditions which are definitely not met?
Well, basically, they haven't fulfilled any criteria that are necessary for the proper beginning of accession negotiations for Ukraine to join the European Union. There's a complicated issue here. Basically, there's a broad set of criteria called the Copenhagen criteria for membership in the European Union. But at issue for the last year and a half, really since the beginning of the war, is that Ukraine was beginning to become a candidate country. And after the beginning of the war, there was a general urgency in the European Union and from a lot of EU leaders to begin this process right away. So the European Commission granted Ukraine candidacy or candidate status last summer, in summer of 2022. At that time, they asked Ukraine to make progress on 7 steps. These are mostly about rule of law issues. We don't have to go through every one, but basically making sure that the procedure for appointing judges is legitimate, for appointing members of the High Council, for improving anti-corruption legislation, anti-money laundering legislation, anti-oligarch laws, more media freedom and protection for national minorities. So the European Commission granted the candidacy and then requested that these steps be fulfilled. So these are really, think of these as like really elementary things that should be necessary, should be really taken for granted in a country that we want to have as a candidate of the European Union. Ukraine was sort of waved through on these points, and then the Commission required that they begin to complete them and after that. So we're really at a very early stage, and the European Commission found that Ukraine had made progress in 4 areas: on judicial selection, on vetting of members of their High Council, on money laundering, and on media freedom. We looked into this, a number of other Hungarian institutions have looked into this as well, and we think that the progress on those issues is quite frankly very little or none. And so the Hungarian perspective is that it's pretty clear that this is being pushed forward for not according to the intrinsic success and progress, but for larger geopolitical reasons or even ideological reasons. And this is not a good way to proceed with European Union membership. It's not a way to build a stronger union. It does not raise confidence around the procedures that are involved. And frankly, it's going to cost the European Union a gigantic amount of money. So from all of these perspectives and from each standpoint, it looks like a terrible path. And currently, as you pointed out, the European Council is meeting, Prime Minister Orbán is there, and Hungary is saying no to the beginning of accession talks for Ukraine.
Just in order to help a little bit our viewers, what is the normal way for a country's candidacy for the EU? What steps should be taken before becoming a member?
Right. So the Copenhagen criteria that have been the guidelines for European Union membership are basically a set of standards around good political functioning, fairness in legislative procedures, regular democratic elections. Everything is suspended in Ukraine at the moment. a proper functioning of a marketplace, the adoption of the European Union set of laws and regulations. All of these are areas that are required for full membership. And there is always a sequence that's established for bringing a country to become a candidate. And then after that, to begin the process of fulfilling these criteria, and along that way to begin the actual negotiations concerning a timeline for accession. Now, the real issue here, again, from a whole of Europe standpoint, and particularly here in the neighborhood of Hungary, is that the usual procedure is being thrown out the door. The Western Balkan countries have been waiting a long time to join the European Union. They have made significant progress along this path, and yet they aren't being given the same opportunities. No special exceptions are being made for our neighbors in the Western Balkans, but for this larger project that has come into being since the beginning of the war, almost kind of like a moral crusade, if you will. They're ready, the European authorities seem to be ready to throw those requirements out the door. So this is really a dangerous situation in the Western Balkans too. A lot of people have already moved to the European Union. There's a sense in some of the candidate countries of the beginnings of a loss of hope about European Union membership. So it's really galling and shocking to see that it looks like there's a more political purpose now behind accession to the European Union, that it's not just a fair procedure that one can follow, but that a special favor is being granted in the case of Ukraine if it were to proceed along that path, whereas the Western Balkan countries, which are closer to us, more conservative, share our mindset in many ways, or maybe there are political reasons that the European Union is making that process very slow. So on the simplest level, this is about maintaining the actual legitimacy of this process, because the legitimacy of the process itself is at stake when you start to make gigantic exceptions and throw out the rules.
Would you think that the offering the candidacy for Ukraine in this rapid way could be a substitute for the NATO membership, which was more in the forefront in recent months, but it seems not on the table right now? How do you think that?
Yeah, well, there certainly are defense implications from a potential admission of Ukraine to the European Union. Of course, it's not the same as admission to NATO. These are two different types of organization, and it's very important to keep them clear. Actually, I would say in the background of this, and this is just kind of interpretation or speculation on my part, but there is declining interest in the United States from a political standpoint in providing military and economic assistance for Ukraine. There's the appetite for that is waning. Republicans in particular, who were strongly supportive of that, have become less so. So NATO is a defense alliance that would, and if Ukraine were to be a member of NATO, its NATO membership would oblige all of the countries in NATO to become directly militarily involved in its defense, not simply providing support, but basically going to war. It seems that there's no appetite for that, and that the appetite for spending money on sending money to Ukraine, spending money on it, is declining in the United States. So it's maybe not surprising that there's a heightened demand on Europe. Some in the United States are saying, well, we can't fund this forever. This is in the European neighborhood. Well, then Europe needs to take on the funding. So Ukraine's membership in the European Union would be actually a gigantic financial burden on the EU. This is not really being discussed. It's been presented as a kind of moral crusade. The numbers that it would require are quite shocking. So I agree. All of these things are at work in the background, fundamentally in the case of NATO expansion and in the case of the EU. In this circumstance, it's becoming more like a a kind of moral crusade. The Lisbon Treaty has a mutual defense clause, or inserted a mutual defense clause into the Treaty on European Union, so that even if Ukraine became a member of the European Union, it would also be like bringing a country that's currently at war into a group of sovereign member states. So it's quite a difficult process even to imagine at this state, because it would require the resolution of so many questions that are currently still open. So it's at the very least extremely premature, and it's important to put all of the questions on the table before continuing to address it.
What is your estimate? How would Ukrainian membership affect other European Union countries? What kind of financial burden would it mean for us, for example, for Hungarians? How would that look like in the future?
There have been a couple of different studies on this. We cited one of them in our own report. The Financial Times of London put out a study a month or two ago that over a typical 7-year budget cycle, Ukraine's membership would cost the European Union around 190 billion euros. There was a study that came out from a German institute this week pointing out that this would immediately transform the balance of payments or the balance of expenditures within the European Union. And many countries that are currently supposed to be net beneficiaries would instead become net contributors. Basically, the distribution of European Union resources within the European Union would suddenly become very heavily directed to Ukraine. We looked at this, the Institute of International Affairs looked at this and found that currently Ukraine is dependent on about 5 billion euros of foreign support every single month. This is a huge amount of money. It means basically their economy is on life support. And again, from the standpoint of European Union accession, the country's economy would need to stabilize. It would need to see an end to the conflict. We would need to get a sense of what its economy looks like. Is this a stable, functioning economy? Is it able to function on its own? Is it bringing an economic benefit to the European Union? Or would the European Union simply be admitting a war-torn country that requires a gigantic amount of financial resources to stay alive? So the financial impact on other European countries, particularly here in Central Europe, would be very adverse. It would change the balance of financial flows within the European Union, and basically it would become the issue. Like, let's think back to the Greek crisis and what a massive situation that was for the European Union. The amounts of like the fiscal situation in Ukraine without this heavy financial support would create a situation which dwarfs the Greek crisis. So we would basically be importing into the European Union a gigantic financial crisis, and that's simply a non-starter. So until there's a clear depiction of what the Ukrainian economy looks like and what that accession procedure would entail from a financial standpoint, and why it would be in the interests of all of the member states of the European Union, until those questions are answered, it's just a non-starter.
One aspect of this economic burden is the agriculture. Prime Minister Orban mentioned yesterday in the parliament that the European Union support for the Ukrainian agriculture would largely go into the hands of American companies that have bought up large pieces of land in Ukraine. Is that so? How important could that be in this debate?
I think the agricultural issue is a serious one, and we saw that come up over the summer with restrictions on the importation of Ukrainian grain by a number of Central European countries. There was a lot of discussion about that, a lot of attempts to come up with alternative pathways or grain corridors for Ukrainian grain to travel through the European Union. But the fundamental situation is that this would impose a very difficult competitive situation on European farmers in general and Central European farmers in particular. So that's actually an aspect that a number of Central European countries were taking measures on late in the summer. I think it's become a little bit quieter now on the international level, at least with regard to the accession talks. Hungary is the primary one that's still emphasizing this issue. And it is a big one. We're in a time of shifting global trade patterns. A lot of Ukrainian grain products have gone to China over recent years. Looking to the next 5-10 years, if there's more of a decoupling between Europe and China, of course, I hope there isn't, but if there is, then this would make even worse the situation for European farmers, as more and more Ukrainian grain would have to be purchased and would go to the European Union instead. And obviously, if it were part of the European economic area, then that would also create quite a new imbalance in the agricultural trade relations within Europe. So again, all of these are issues that could be discussed and could be addressed, but they're being thrown under the rug. And what Hungary is trying to do in Brussels this week is to make sure that we have an open discussion of each of these topics and a clear plan. Again, in order to keep the European Union strong, or in order to make it strong, we have to know what we're doing, and nothing should be done simply for automatic reasons or just because there's a general impulse to do so. It's very important to get down to the details. And in the agricultural sector, as you mentioned, there are very, very serious problems of integrating the Ukrainian economy into the European Union.
According to President Zelensky, they have made serious steps in order, for example, to combat corruption and the oligarchs. Is that enough, that those steps that the Ukrainian government has already done?
A few weeks ago, János Boka, our Minister for European Affairs, pointed out that these were requirements for Ukraine becoming a candidate country. Again, candidacy is the first step, and then there's the whole accession process. These were really requirements for Ukraine even to become a candidate. They were thrown out the door at that time, and they were imposed retroactively. So we're really looking at a set of requirements which don't even qualify Ukraine for European Union membership. These are just elementary, basic things that should be set before it's even considered. And again, what we found is that although there have been, as the European Commission itself concluded, although there have been some legal changes, some new laws passed on these subjects, fundamentally, the situation is not good, and also not very much time has played out since these changes were made. So the criteria that are used for selecting members of the High Court really is not clear. There have been a couple of changes to the anti-money laundering laws, but we haven't really seen what the implementation of those would look like. There haven't been, a lot of major anti-corruption prosecutions, for example. We're not seeing the results that one would expect to see if these were really transforming the character of corruption and fairness and judicial selection, etc., in Ukraine. It's also very ironic that there have been funds withheld by the European Union to Hungary over a number of different rule of law matters. The European Union and Hungary have actually come to an agreement on some of these with regard to judicial reforms that have been announced, and the agreement has been made that Hungary has satisfied some of those requirements that was announced yesterday on Wednesday the 13th. But it's very ironic to see that this very harsh attitude is being taken toward Hungary, while at the same time, when the European Union looks at Ukraine, which has a very deep set of problems in rule of law areas, apparently they're willing to throw their own standards out the door.
How do you see, will there be other countries supporting, maybe a little bit more quietly, the Hungarian viewpoint?
Well, there have been some interesting studies come out from the Századvég Foundation recently, surveying the attitude and the temperature, taking the temperature of European publics toward accession. And there's quite a cool attitude toward this in Europe as a whole. Unfortunately, that's not reflected in the political positions of most other European premiers at the moment. So again, Hungary is there in Brussels representing its own interests and the viewpoint of the Hungarian people. As everyone knows, I think there's a national consultation going on at the moment to try to take the full temperature of the Hungarian public regarding these issues. And as far as I know, I think the attitude is shared very deeply here that this would be at best a very premature thing to begin. So, of course, anything can happen when European leaders actually convene in Brussels. So we will have to see today and tomorrow what is reflected in terms of whether other leaders also indicate any similarity in their positions. So time will tell about that.
Lastly, let me just refer to our previous conversation. It was about the Hungarian-American relations. How do you see in recent weeks there have been harsh comments by Ambassador Pressman criticizing Hungary in terms of the anti-Semitism, for example. How do you see the coming year for the Hungarian-American relations?
Well, the fundamentals, the long-term fundamentals should be good. And so it's very regrettable to see a caustic and harsh treatment of Hungary by the U.S. Embassy in Budapest. Unfortunately, there have been a number of things, as you've pointed out, that have gone in this direction. In effect, the Biden administration has imposed a kind of mild sanctions regime on Hungary over the last year and a half. This began with the cancellation of the double taxation agreement between Hungary and the United States, which is finally coming to an end at the end of December, and will make commercial exchanges, not trade, but will make the exchange of businesses or operation of businesses in both countries with citizens working in both, make all of that more difficult. So unfortunately, there have been a number of things like that, and in addition to the general tone of communications that you point out, that have been regrettable. So unfortunately, this is the way it is currently, and it's important to maintain exchanges and dialogue. I'm particularly interested in that as a citizen of the United States and Hungary. So I think it's a important and natural relationship, which is continuing to function on a variety of levels, of course. And from a trade standpoint, a military exchange standpoint, general cultural exchange standpoint, all of those things are strong, and they can't really be damaged or go away. But unfortunately, the Biden administration, in order to punish Hungary for its divergence from their kind of vision of what the world should look like culturally, politically, geopolitically, in order to punish Hungary for that, they're choosing to make things a little bit more difficult, and that's really regrettable. So I hope that 2024 will see an improvement in that.
Let's hope that. Mr. Pappin, thank you very much for the interview. For our viewers, your report on Ukraine and the problems of the Ukrainian EU membership can be found on your website. It's also in English as well, isn't it?
It is in English at hiia.hu, and you can also follow the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs on Facebook as well. There's content in both Hungarian and English there, on Instagram, on Twitter, on the website, and you can find there also the information about our conferences and upcoming events. Obviously, the holidays are upon us in the next few days, but we have a very busy 2024 planned, and would be very happy to see some of your listeners at our events.
Thank you very much. All these informations we will put on the description of the video, so you can find it and link it to it. Thank you very much, and let me wish you a very Merry Christmas for all your staff and all your family. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone. Please just subscribe to our new channel. It's Hetek Word. We are coming with new interviews and summaries of news in the coming days. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.